So hello everyone, my name's Karina Urquhart and I'm the Executive Director at BIC and your host for this Green BIC Brunch event, which today has its focus all on libraries. We'll be tweeting about this event using the hashtag Green BIC Brunch, so feel free to join in the conversation online. Some housekeeping before we get started. We will be taking questions. You don't have to wait till the end of the session, so we will be looking at the questions at the end. So after we've had our presentations have happened and we've had a bit of a chat, so there is a dedicated session, as you'll see in a minute. Just use the questions box that you should have on your little. There should be a little toolkit. Just go into that questions box and submit your question to us. The event is being recorded for BIC to use in its marketing and to allow people who can't make it today to enjoy the event later on. Don't worry, no attendees will be identified in the recording. And finally, just a reminder, BIC is a neutral membership organisation, and we politely ask that all attendees and all speakers avoid any conversations or questions that might be construed commercially sensitive or anti-competitive. So very quickly, what is a Green BIC Brunch? I hear you all ask. This is the latest session in our series of Green BIC Brunches, which are created specifically to explore key areas of the book supply chain that impact upon our planet's health. Each Green BIC Brunch is dedicated to one area of the supply chain, exploring and inspiring change in response to environmental challenges, all part of BIC's Green Promise. We'll be sharing the slides later on with you and also later on our website as well. So don't worry if you're trying to scribble down that very long link, you don't need to. You'll have it all in the slides later on. Don't worry. Here's the agenda for the session. So we've got an hour and a half and we will be starting with, I'm going to invite our speakers to say hello or wave at you as we go through. So we've got 5 speakers lined up for you. We have Hari Saharvita, NSULIB Chair, current Chair, Chief Librarian at Helsinki City Library. We also have Yvonne Morris, Projects and Programmes Manager at CILIP, Simon Crump, BIC's Environmental Consultant, and Rowan Williamson, Associate Director, and Karen Carden, Resources and Systems Manager, both from University of the Arts, London. We've got I think it's like 15 minute or so question and answer session at the end, and then we'll finish at 1:30. So for the benefit of those of you who aren't familiar with BIC, we're a UK-based members organisation at the heart of the book industry, creating standards, best practices and resources. We help organisations become more efficient, save money, become less wasteful and ultimately greener. We hold a unique position of trust, facilitating both UK and international industry-wide collaboration to reach agreement on dependable standards and best practice in the supply chain. We do this in a variety of ways, including running 5 strategic committees, focusing on libraries, metadata, digital, physical, and green supply chains. We offer training events and workshops and execute supply chain projects for and on behalf of the membership, but also the wider book industry as well. We operate 3 industry recognised accreditation schemes, including one for the library sector. And you don't have to be a member to apply to those. You can find out more on our website. As you know, it's in the supply chain that significant changes can be made by the book industry to improve our green credentials. BIC, being the long established dedicated supply chain organisation, has the environment very high on our strategic priorities for 2024 and beyond. We're committed to championing the green agenda and providing organisations with the tools and resources to help them make their supply chains more sustainable. Take a look at our BIC Green Hub, the link's on the screen, where we share information on how the industry can be greener and showcase what BIC is doing to help. So moving on, just a little bit more about the green work we're doing. 3 years ago, the BIC Green Supply Chain Committee signed off on our Green Supply Chain Work Plan, which is based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And BIC is one of the 3 founder partners of the Green BIC Supply Chain Alliance, otherwise known as GBA. The other 2 being BISG in the US and BookNet Canada in Canada. More information about the Alliance, the Green Work Plan and the Green Committee can be found on our website via the links on the screen there. So back to the purpose of today's session, which is what we're all here for. We'll be hearing from key library sector stakeholders about their sustainability initiatives, goals and challenges, and what it means to be green. We'll start off with an international perspective from IFLA, then come closer to home looking at what is happening in the UK with an update from CILIP. We'll also be sharing an update on all of BIC's work in this space and finally drilling down into an academic library, looking at examples of initiatives in practice. So now, without further ado,
Karina,
yes?
Really sorry to interrupt, but we can't see the slides.
Oh, okay.
We can only see you, we can't see the slides.
How's that?
Okay, perfect.
Yep, okay. So just go back a little bit. So thank you for letting me know. Always useful. So let me just go back to just the link there for the viewers. So yes, so there are the slides, the links I was talking about earlier. So you've got a link there to the Green Supply Chain Committee and a link there to the Green BIC Alliance. Just to go back a bit more, there's the link there to the Green BIC Hub. For those of you who might want to, who maybe are on screen at the moment and perhaps want to just go and have a look around, etc. And then there's a slide a little bit more about our vision and everything else I was just talking about. So I won't go back over everything. So just going to hand over now to our first speaker. So our library journey starts today, as I've said, with an international view from Hari Sahavita, NSULIP chair at IFLA and chief librarian at the Helsinki City Library. Harry's going to talk to us today about the sustainability work of IFLA and give us a quick look at the UN SDGs for Finnish public libraries. So over to you, Harry.
Thank you. Right, maybe we go to the next one straight away. I'm delighted to present NSULIP today. Thank you for the kind invitation and introduction. So I'm going to give you a very general overview of sustainability work in libraries. We start with green buildings and then a little bit about green library services and then some new trends in rural education and resilience and so on. But let us remind you first, can we have the next slide? So about IFLA, so NSULIP, Environment, Sustainability and Libraries is an IFLA section. And if we take the next one, our pride is actually IFLA Green Library Award, which has been going on 8 years now. You still have time to leave your submissions for this year competitions. So I think we can go straight to the business and take the next one and begin with some questions one has to face when we're talking about sustainability. And the first one is the free rider problem. We very easily think that bad boys are responsible for great damages, so we don't really need to do anything. But that actually means that we don't do our share if we think that only those who are bad boys do that job. And then we cannot reach anything if we don't begin somewhere and take some little steps. So we really should act. And if we go on to the next one, and it is also true that we cannot save the world, yes, but we could introduce some alternative ways of thinking and acting. Libraries could be a kind of laboratories or playing ground where one can test and try new things, new ways of consuming and new economy and so on. That might be quite remarkable thing in the future if we have, in a way, we know what we could do, we have some kind of schema for it. But now, let us begin with the buildings. The next one, please. So, the sustainability work in libraries focused, first of all, and at the beginning on the buildings. That means that we have the building, but also green office principle and some routines like weight management. That's very familiar part of green thinking. Let us take the next one. So it's actually about the library location, how easy it is to get to the library with public transportation and so on. Certainly about energy consumption, lighting, sorting waste, reuse, circulating. And the idea was that how can we save energy and money while building environmentally friendly libraries? And these are actually the very well-known criteria for eco-certificates and things like that. And we tend to think that they are easy to measure, that they are very clear criteria. Well, we'll see that it's not always the case. So, this means that we are talking about carbon footprint. We can take the next one now. So, the library building are the greatest source for emissions in libraries. And how we use the building is also a very remarkable thing. And now we nowadays talk about carbon footprint. And in Finland, we've been measuring different size libraries from different part of the country and twice now, and trying to measure the carbon footprint. I think we can take the next one and stay there a little bit more. So here we can see that when we are in Finland, heating is the greatest source of emissions, 34% is 1/3. And electricity comes, the yellow one comes straight out after that. And actually all the other things are minor sources of emissions. So it's the building, it's electricity, heating, and so on, which really means something, and transportations and things like that are quite minor things, which, well, it was not a surprise. If we go to the next one, we actually thought that this was so nice and result, the first measurements. But here you can see that last year we had 3 times greater carbon footprint. The total carbon footprint in 2022 was over 100,000. Then it was only 32,000 in 2020. So what happened? Let us have some remarks on carbon footprint. So the next one. Right. The point is that what we take into the calculations, we can take only available and relevant measurable data. But that means that we have to exclude things. We can calculate only things which are quite accurate information, and there may be data which is not attainable. Actually, the hardest part of the measurement was to collect the data. So, yes, I think we can go on, because here we got actually the explanation. So the first one, we were making the measurement, we couldn't have data about the servers and data transfer, and that is actually the digital footprint. And we didn't even know how to calculate these things. 2 years later, the calculations and the forms and so on, they're so much more developed, and there was new data available, so we could include the digital footprint into our calculations, and suddenly that means that we had 3 times greater carbon footprint. But you can see here that it actually depends very much about the size of a library. So the digital footprint is very remarkable for big libraries in Finland, but not so for small libraries. And this is actually to say that we have to think about, when we are trying to define the carbon footprint, we have to think what kind of data we have, what are we calculating, and also that what we find out that we really cannot compare these two calculations. There's only 2 years between them, but you cannot calculate them because we had so much more data last year. Okay, let us go to the next one. Yes. So about the Green Library buildings. The building is very remarkable part of our sustainable work, but it's not the whole story. We cannot rebuild all the libraries, and they are extensive and expensive projects. And the most important thing is that actually the buildings do not belong to our job. We don't make the decisions on buildings. It's somebody else who is making the decision. It may be the city or university or anybody else. And also that these green office principle, green building principles, they are quite general requirements. They are not characteristic for libraries, but everybody should follow them. Everybody should sort-based, circulate and reuse. So to be green, a library should be something more than just a green library building. So we have the green library services. And let us go to the next slide. The most natural thing is to say that it's open access to reliable and updated information on sustainability and related topics. And that is, however, a little bit problematic too, because we think often that we should offer information, all kind of information, and that we should be neutral. And we cannot check all the contents. We just cannot check that all the contents we have are reliable information. And we may ask, what is reliable information? And if we take this path, we have to ask that, well, has climate change and ecotrees changed something? Can we really afford that we would be neutral on this topic? These are big questions, and I don't have answers to them, but it may be good to think about them and consider that what is the role of libraries. We have an ethical aspect on this discussion, which is often passed quite easily. But let us take the next one, which is shared spaces and devices. Yes. And this is, again, something we are doing in the libraries. This is something librarians do. It belongs to the library work. We have working and learning spaces. We have shared devices. We have things libraries. And the idea is, well, it's equality, so that everybody have access, for example, to internet, but also that shared use decreases consumption, that one does not need to buy everything. But it is actually an argument which is quite hard to verify, because you cannot, how can you count that? Does it really do so, or do we just imagine that yes, people are consuming less, that people don't buy the things because there's libraries? But here we come to the point that libraries could be place to test new way of consuming. All right, and I think we can go now to the next slide. And at the first, the discussion concerned really only green library buildings, and after that we got the information services and shared use and so on, things libraries coming into the discussion. But actually only after the Sustainable Development Goals 2015, the discussion changed, because now we have very strong social emphasis on social sustainability. And it also means a change, because before that, it was the librarians. I, as a chief librarian, was telling to my superiors and the property caretakers that, hey, couldn't we do something for this to have a more sustainable building. After the Sustainable Development Goals, the thing.
Hari, sorry to interrupt. Just a 2-minute warning.
Oh, okay.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm fast. It changed so that now the city has a environmental program, and they are telling me that, hey, I should do something. So in a way, I'm not alone anymore on this. So let us run forward and take the next one. The problem with the SDGs is that they are very general, and there is no access to reliable information mentioned. And take the next one. We've been thinking about this in Finland and what SDGs might mean for public libraries. So we selected 6 of the good education is quite evident, fighting inequality, and thinking about what they would mean for public libraries in the Finnish context. And then let me take the last one, just to show you before my time runs off. Even the newer trends is that we should think how we can promote reading and literature on sustainability, and how can libraries promote social and cultural dialogue on sustainable developments. And this is actually the thing we are, at least in Finland and many other places too, we are thinking about that how can we have the sustainable work in the core of the library work, and without forgetting the social aspect here. All right, I think my time ran out, so I just say thank you, and you can find more about Insolip on our webpage, of course, and from libraries.fi you can find some of our Finnish projects. So I thank you, and I hope you got some general overview what libraries have been doing on sustainability. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Hari, and I'm sorry to cut you short there, but yes, some fascinating insights. I particularly like your last point about the role, effectively the role of the librarian. So looking at what the librarian can do to promote, those books and the literature, the content that's about sustainability, to try and help inform.
Yeah,
current generation, each generation.
To go. Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So moving on then, I would now like to invite our next speaker. So coming closer to home, our library journey continues, and we're going to look at UK activity now. So we're going over to CILIP. So I'd like to invite Yvonne Morris, Projects and Programmes Manager at CILIP, to join us. Yvonne is going to tell us about CILIP's Green Libraries Partnership and Campaign. So over to you, Yvonne.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today. As Karina has said, I'm Yvonne Morris. I'm Projects and Programmes Manager for CILIP, the UK's Library and Information Association. And I'm going to be providing a brief outline of the work of the CILIP-led Green Libraries Partnership and the Green Libraries Campaign. So if you move to the next slide, please. So starting with the Green Libraries Partnership, and what is it and how did it come about? Well, it was a coming together of a number of things over the last few years. It was a response to conversations at COP26 in Glasgow in 2021, to the number of local authorities declaring a climate emergency, and also to conversations within the library and information sector about what the sector's response to the climate emergency should be, what can the sector contribute, and what could the sector do if we come together to work on this important agenda. So CILIP developed a proposal for a Green Libraries Partnership programme, and we were successful in securing funding for the development phase from Arts Council England. And the partnership was born in the spring of 2022. Our partners for the first phase, the ACE funded phase, being the British Library, Libraries Connected, and Julie's Bicycle, who are a not-for-profit that mobilises the arts and culture to take action on climate change. Now, in the first phase, it did have a very public library and very English focus, and that was down to the fact that our funder for that phase was Arts Council England. But as I'll explain in a moment, the scope as we move into the next phase, the campaign phase, is much broader. So the aims of the partnership, 4 aims really: to discover and harness the existing environmental work going on in libraries. So it's been very much a discovery phase. To build and support environmental understanding and action within libraries. So to build public library services understanding of their environmental data where that's available. To ensure that the core functions of libraries are evolving, adapting and becoming more resilient. Also to enable libraries to work with their local communities to continue to build environmental understanding and action within those communities. And finally, to position libraries at the heart of local environmental programmes, including those led by local authorities. And advocating for the role of libraries in local environmental change is a very important role of the Green Libraries Partnership. So if we can move on now to looking at programme activities. Next slide, please. The main activities over the last, coming up to 2 years now, I'll be talking about are the research we've undertaken, the grant fund we've run, the Green Libraries Network we set up, manifesto we developed, our conference and our online hub. So I'll talk you through each of these briefly. So we can move to the next slide, please, and the research. So as I said, it's been very much a discovery phase. We wanted to improve our knowledge and understanding through research. So we commissioned targeted research and evidence gathering, both to better understand the existing landscape, so what libraries are currently doing, what they would like to do, and what support they need to do what they want to do, with a view to using the insights gathered from that research to inform and drive the targeting of future interventions. So a survey was developed in conjunction with a focus group made up of representatives from 16 library services, and it was open over the summer of 2022. 55 library services responded, which together represents around 7,500 staff, 10,000 volunteers, and around 1,200 buildings. And the survey looked at the 4 areas here on the slide: policy and action plans, people, actions and engagement. So what did it tell us? Well, looking first at policy and plans, we found that overall library services are in the early stages of formalising their environmental commitment. 85% follow local authority environmental policy, though the relevance of those policies to library services varies. Only 15% had their own environmental policy and plan, and around 32% were developing their own environmental policy and plan. Now, this is 18 months old now, so no doubt if we were to repeat it, the numbers with their own policies, environmental policies, would be higher. If we look at people and training, environmental roles, responsibilities and training was not well developed, certainly not in 2022. 36% have some environmental roles and responsibilities, but these tended to be informal or within local authority teams, so not library specific. 38% have had some form of environmental training, mainly by their local authority, but not library specific training. Now, looking at actions, while libraries were starting to take action, this has tended to focus on quick wins and behavioural changes, as in many cases, they depend on local authorities for bigger changes and investment. So library action to date has focused on building energy use, reducing materials use and waste, so reducing plastics, and sourcing sustainable products and services. Now, when we move on to engagement, unsurprisingly, library services have much more agency around their engagement activities. Key engagement initiatives to date include environmentally themed books and collections, environmental services such as battery recycling points within libraries, and learning activities. So overall, we found from this research that the key issues and challenges are dependence on local authorities for bigger changes and investments, access to environmental data, and a lack of time, money, knowledge, and expertise. But despite these challenges, nearly all respondents believe that environmental action and engagement can bring opportunities for their library services, for their users, and for their communities. So we took away from this research that the level of control and influence over buildings, investment, and procurement choices is a key determining factor in terms of what a library can do environmentally, in particularly for local authority services. Overall, library services tend to have more control over procurement than over buildings and assets. Independently run services usually have a higher degree of autonomy around environmental decision-making, planning, and investment. So if we move on to the next slide, which is our grant scheme. This is the grant scheme that ran between August and October 2022. And we invited public libraries to apply for small grants to run projects on related to one of three themes. These themes were research and exploratory activity, practical environmental solutions, and community awareness and engagement. The applications we received and the grants we awarded were weighted almost exclusively towards public engagement and nature-themed activities. 15 grants were awarded in total, ranging in value between £2,000 and £3,500, and the total investment was just under £40,000. The projects themselves varied from a cycling repair service to skills training for staff, which we were particularly pleased to fund because the survey had told us that there wasn't at that point any library specific training. Also, project funded some literary festivals, a brilliant bee festival. We supported the Bees in Barnsley Festival, which was a very innovative library-based event focused on engaging the public with climate change and its ecological impact. And also some of the projects developed library gardens and green spaces. And from the evaluation reports that the grantees were required to produce, we know that over 7,500 people engaged with just these 15 projects, and the feedback received was largely very positive. Now, at the same time we were running this grant program in England, our colleagues in Wales and Scotland were running some grant programs too, and their programs were open to libraries from all sectors. So, for example, in Wales, we had Cardiff University. They were one of the successful applicants. And in Scotland, a school was awarded funding. And there's a neat summary of the projects there on the link on the slide. So if we move now onto our next activity, which is our Green Libraries Manifesto. This manifesto was developed in collaboration with our partners to act as a unified call for the sector and a guiding document for libraries to take environmental action. To date, we've had almost 200 signatories from not just public libraries. This manifesto is open to libraries across all sectors. And we have international signatories as well. And so far, it's been translated into 3 languages. The manifesto makes 7 key commitments, which we call pledges. So if we look at these briefly in turn, number 1 is bringing environmental sustainability to the heart of decision-making in our libraries. Number 2, innovate and evolve environmental practice across core library functions. Number 3 is working with communities and supporting local green initiatives, empowering our local communities to take positive environmental action. Number 4, using our voice of libraries for more impact. So using the unique reach and position of trust that libraries hold to share and help people find verified information, to combat climate disinformation, improve climate and environmental literacy and understanding. Number 5 is working in partnership to enhance the positive impact of green programs and initiatives. Pledge number 6 is growing and sharing our knowledge. So a commitment to continually expand environmental understanding as an individual, library and information professional, as a team, and as a library service. And finally, number 7, supporting young people. Supporting young people to be leaders in a green and just transition, and supporting them to take action at home, at school, and within their communities. And pledging to assist children and young people in advancing environmental debate and ensuring that their voices are heard. So the manifesto is a living, breathing, growing document, and we very much want the pledges to be translated into action, and that is a core part of our work going forward. So if we move on now to a highlight from the first phase, I would say that was our Green Libraries Conference, the inaugural Green Libraries Conference that was held at the Wellcome Collection in London in March 2023. Thanks to the ACE funding we were in receipt of, it was free to attend, and 130 delegates came together representing libraries in the public sector, public libraries, but libraries from other sectors as well. And they came together to discuss the unique position that libraries hold in educating, raising awareness and taking action on the environment. There were 2 key themes: reducing the environmental impact of libraries and the role of libraries in supporting communities to address climate change issues. Over the course of the day, attendees had sessions on both of these, and we also had a keynote speech from Lord Parkinson of Whitley Bay, who was the Libraries Minister. And then finally, if we can move on to our Green Libraries Network. We established a network towards the start of phase 1, and this is an online platform for green champions across the UK library and information sector, so not just public libraries. It's a chance for them to come together, to create ideas, to collaborate, to support one another, and crucially, to shape the future of the Green Libraries Partnership and the campaign, which I'll be talking about in a moment. It's growing steadily, and we now have around about 125 members. It's free to join, so you're welcome to join up. So if we move on now, just to talk briefly about the Green Libraries campaign. We're transitioning at the moment from the first developmental phase I've just been speaking about into a shared Green Libraries.
2-minute warning, sorry.
We're moving into this campaign mode with a more proactive, outcome-focused approach, very much informed by the insights from phase 1. So from what we learned from the research, from the grant project evaluations, case studies we've collected, what our Green Libraries Network members have been telling us, and from the conversations we had at conference and beyond. It has a broader scope, as I said at the outset. We want all sectors to get involved and all nations. So we just move on to, we're almost there now, just a quick look at the long-term ambition of the campaign, which is that every library becomes a green library. And over the next few years, we'll be working towards this ambition by promoting the role of libraries in all sectors and across all parts of the UK in addressing climate change and environmental sustainability. By developing a cross-sector data and evidence base of libraries' climate change action, by growing our Green Libraries Network and the wider network of green champions, by working with partners to grow the grant fund, to create more opportunities for libraries to innovate, and to actively add new partners who share our common aim. And we've recently added SCONAL, the Society of College, National and University Libraries, which creates a powerful link with university libraries, university sector. And also we're delighted to be working now with the Sustainability in NHS Knowledge and Library Services Community Practice to build a link with health. And we're working more closely now with devolved nations. But just to say, there's always a but, we're no longer funded by Arts Council England, so a big part of our work at the moment, an important focus, is on securing sponsorship. And if we just go on to the next slide, I'm not going to give you a hard sell here, so I'm not going to pitch, but if anyone in the audience or anyone with your networks thinks that they'd like to have a conversation with us about sponsorship opportunities to make some of those, you know, those aims and ambitions, those actions we want to see happen over the next few years actually happen to help us, then get in touch, and we have a brochure we can send you, or we can set up a meeting. So yeah, next slide, almost there, and yeah, get involved. So take a look at our Green Libraries Hub. That's the link there where you'll find more information about everything I've just been talking about. Sign our manifesto if you're a library service, join the Green Libraries Network, and support the campaign. And we're not just talking about by sponsoring, just get behind our campaign in other ways, and yeah, we can really make a difference. And yeah, that's it. The next slide's just got my contact details on. Happy to take questions in the time we have left at the end, but otherwise drop me an email, and yeah, we can chat.
Brilliant, thank you very much for that. I think your talk is highlighting the importance of people and the role that libraries as well, but librarians play, and also that that libraries can still do things despite the dependence on local authorities as well. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. Love the Green Libraries Network as well. So, and it's obvious from what you've been saying that there's an appetite for change, and that there's a great sort of body of enthusiasm and willingness behind the work that you're doing. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. So let me just get rid of my camera, make sure you can still see the slides, because we don't want that happening again. I'm going to hand over now to our next speaker, which is Simon Crump, BIC's environmental consultant. Simon is going to talk to us today about BIC's work in the sustainability space, a bit more generally, perhaps, and then just give an update on our projects, focusing on the latest developments in our Designed for Recycling work. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Karina. Yes, as Karina has already explained, BIC has a number of committees, and the work, the Green Supply Chain Committee is the committee that I report to, and Karina, and from their work plan, my role is to take the work plan and convert it into projects, work with members, and deliver those projects. So, Karina, if I could have the next slide, please. So, as you can see, the people who make up BIC's membership are very wide and fully cover the book industry supply chain. And as I said, I work with people who volunteer to work on these projects to deliver them. Could I have the next slide, please? So at the moment, we have a number of projects that are running. The first one was all around environmental accreditation badges. This has now been completed, and you can see it on BIC's Green Hub. This is all about looking at all the environmental accreditation badges and standards that are applicable to the book industry. There are an awful lot of them out there, but they're not all necessarily applicable to the book industry. Obviously, you've got the various things like the ISO standards that cover how people work and your processes, and then there are things like the FSC, PEFC that are accreditations around paper, and we all know how important that is to know where your paper comes from and that you're sourcing it responsibly. Currently, I'm working on 3 other projects. One of them is looking at the offsetting schemes that are available across the world. The purpose of this project is to look at the schemes and be able to provide people information and a way of assessing both the organization that might be selling these projects, the offsets, and also the projects themselves. We know that there is a requirement to basically, you should be reducing, removing carbon from your value chain, and then you can set offsets. And in fact, you can only buy offsets if you have a published and recognized program whereby you are reducing your carbon in the world. The next project is looking at the reporting, the sustainability and environmental reporting that is made by companies, organizations up and down the book industry supply chain. And that is trying to get to a point where maybe the whole book industry, maybe just 1-2 pieces of data to begin with, can report and say, you know, in 2022, the whole book industry had a value of this for whatever we decide is the value that is going to be reported on. And then 23, it came down to this, so that we can show to the world that the book industry actually is working on its environmental and its sustainability for the industry. But today we're going to mainly talk about the Design for Recycling project. Could I have the next slide, please, Karina? The Design for Recycling project actually is split into 3 parts. Part 1 was a review of the life cycle assessment of what was happening now, or rather it finished in 2022. So it was the life cycle assessment of what was going on in the industry up to that. Part 2, which should be publishing at the end of this month, we were actually looking at the initial design of a book to a manufactured book. And then part 3 will look at the manufactured book to end of life. Could I have the next slide, please, Karina? So if we look at the part 1 for the project, the life cycle assessment, the main points to take from this report, as you can see, are that it's actually a closed loop for books that have been sold, as long as they're not sold or returned. That means, you know, if they're bought and someone puts them on their shelves and they sit there for 30 years, all that carbon has been captured and it's not released again, and that's a really good thing. Anecdotally, you can see that the returns run between 20 and 30%, and we know that that is an issue, and we can only ever get percentages because nobody actually wants to talk about the actual figures. But based on that there are returns, larger publishing houses or publishing houses are looking at that, and that is a very good way. If they reduce their returns, they can reduce their carbon footprint. It all comes down to their demand planning of actually how many books do they really need to print, how many books are actually going to be sold, so we can stop overproducing and therefore just produce exactly what is required. Luckily, because of the way that printing has changed, in the past you had lithographic presses with plates and everything, and your minimum print run was 1,000 copies. Now you have inkjet presses, a bit like your inkjet desktop printer, and these are much more efficient and you have much smaller print runs. And we also have POD, print on demand programs, which is a distribution process where you will just print 1 copy. The book doesn't actually sit in a warehouse. It only exists when someone has placed an order. The book is printed, put into the packaging, and turns up on your doorstep. We do know that in the industry that the majority of all returns are pulped for whatever reason, but they are done like that. When it comes to printers, they're actually very good and they're recycling as much of their waste as they possibly can. And if it's chemicals, because of the inks and various things, those have to be disposed of under government regulations. So in many ways, printers are doing an awful lot to help with the recycling and with their waste disposal. They're obviously always looking at extra things that they can do, but at the moment they have a very good record of what they're working on. When it comes to warehouses and distributors, again, they are looking to reduce what they're recycling, what they have to recycle, what they need to get rid of. Freight forwarders, again, they're doing similar things. They've looked at different shrink wraps, but what they have sometimes found that alternatives, which you think might be good, actually break down to microplastics, which are worse, but they continue the search for different materials that can be used. And obviously, you know, the containers that we see, you might have seen grand designs and things where people are using the old containers and they're converting them into offices and housing. So again, that they are recycling as much as they possibly can. Libraries are beginning to remove the extra packaging they add to books, and this is obviously makes it easier for books to be recycled when they become old. The only other area that we really still needs a lot of improvement is recycling from home. I don't think people realize that you can put your book into your paper and your cardboard recycling bin and it will be recycled responsibly. Could I have the next slide, please, Karina? So what are the innovation areas that we discovered during part one? You know, people are trying to remove the plastic from packaging, although you have to be careful. You say, oh, just use paper instead. But for some reasons, it's not always the best option. It can actually have a higher carbon footprint. So you think you're looking at your best options, what you can do, making trade-offs. All of this is all about making trade-offs. And as the team often say, it's actually shades of green or grey, because one thing you think is better, but then something else crops up and it doesn't appear so. They're looking at reducing plastics across the whole supply chain, changing lamination where they can. Sustainability is now becoming at the forefront of book design. You need to educating people how they can recycle books. And one major publisher is looking at making sure that their books are trained across Europe rather than put on a truck. So again, that reduces the carbon footprint of them. So in conclusions for part one, it's a closed loop, 100% recycled. Sold books need more work to be done. It's actually very hard to get actual figures because people prefer to provide percentages, but the whole book can be recycled and contaminants will be removed during that recycling process. Could I have the next slide, please, Karina? So part two that we're at the moment, which we should be publishing at the end of this month, the scope of this has been to look at designing and optimizing books for recycling and looking at the sustainability aspects of the printing and the materials that you're using. It aims to deliver a report that will give practical examples and hints and tips and suggestions how all of this can be done. So it has covered things like sustainable fonts. Sustainable fonts have always been there in the sense that you could pick something like Garamond over Times New Roman because it uses less space on a page. But we now have people who are actively designing sustainable fonts that make it easier to read. I'm sure we've all been in a bookshop and picked up a book and opened it and the font size has been so small that you can't read it. They're trying to work so you don't need to do that sort of thing. There's been a rationalised of trim sizes and paper types, so you're not having so many different trim sizes and therefore can be wasting paper when books are being printed. There's a balance to be taken between recycled and virgin papers, often based on its carbon footprint and what material and what the content of the book is that you're trying to print on it. Going back to old-fashioned methods and looking at the extent of books and printing them in even workings. When you're printing books and they are printed in what's known as signatures of say 32 pages, you want your book to be made up in an even number of 32s. They're also looking at the materials used in the manufacturing of books and different options to laminations and foils. But also the report details the fact that the lamination makers, they're aware because they're plastic that people think, oh, they're bad, but they actually in reality do a very good job in protecting your book. But instead, they are also looking at how they can reduce the amount of plastic in the actual lamination itself and are looking at different materials to find something new that does the same thing to protect a book, to preserve its life. And so there's a lot of work going on in that area. So as you can see that this will be a very interesting and useful report for publishers and people to look at, to be able to change their habits, make things different, to make books more recyclable. Could I have the next slide, please, Karina? And yes, so thank you all very much. There are my contact details and links to the various reports and the BIC Green Hub, which I know Karina's already put in another slide, but you have it there again. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. Very interesting. Just for, of course, I would say that, but just for clarity, when you're talking about the percentage of books that are being pulped, for those that may not be familiar, you do actually mean that that is then pulped and recycled?
Yes, it is pulped and recycled. Generally, when books are pulped and recycled, they're recycled into other materials. They're recycled into things like packaging, tissues, all those other things that don't need to be of such a high grade material, and the color of it doesn't, you know, you're not looking for a pure white finish necessarily, although obviously some areas of recycling does go back into making higher quality recycled papers for the book industry.
Yeah.
But it's worth saying, of the whole pulp industry, only 7% of it actually is used to make papers that are we use in publishing, to print books on. The other 93% is all the packaging and that goes on out there, and everything else. Everything else.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay.
So the pulp figure is a positive thing. It's not just being pulped and put into landfill. It's been pulped and then reused and recycled and reused. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. And I'm going to move on now. I'm sorry, onto the next slide. Our fourth and fifth speakers. So we're going to drill down even further. We've had a look at sort of top level at what other organisations are doing. We started off internationally with IFLA, came down with SILIP, came down even further with BIC, and now we're going to drill down into sustainability in action in an academic library. So I'm going to hand the reins over to Rowan Williamson, Associate Director, and Karen Carden, Resources and Systems Manager, both of whom are working at University of the Arts Library. So I'm going to hand over to you first, Rowan.
Thank you, Karina. So we're going to be talking today about working towards net zero at UAL. University of the Arts London is a really large institution. We've got about 21,000 students. The libraries are spread around 8 different sites. So it's quite a big institution, and we have some particular challenges being a single arts institution as well. Can I have the next slide, please? The University of the Arts developed a new strategy year before last, and part of that includes us declaring that we are a social purpose university. And this is I think it's still quite unusual jargon, but it's becoming something that other HE institutions are starting to do as well, sometimes called social responsibility. And it's really about us having a strategic aim and building that social purpose into it. What it means in practice is that we orient everything we do, our teaching, research and operations, around 4 social purpose goals. And those goals are bringing joy, meaning and purpose to our lives, celebrating difference of all kinds, regenerating our environment and building more equitable prosperity. And you can see from those that there's a key strand there, regenerate our environment. And that also they're similar to the UN development goals actually, in that they have this principle that these things are interdependent, and there is kind of intersectionality there between what's happening with equity and the environment, for example. So University of the Arts is currently in People and Planet's University League. It's ranked 4th, and it's very active. We last year published a climate action plan, declared a climate emergency, and we have a goal to be net zero by 2030 in our primary and secondary emissions. Next slide, please. So for library services, we obviously have to find a way to support the university strategy. And so we looked at what we really needed to do. And for us, it's about driving change. And that's our big challenge. We've got some pros and cons here listed. I haven't labelled them. You can guess which are which. We have got massively engaged staff. Social justice concerns, very high priority. It's part of individual values and it's part of university values, and we really live that. We've got a chief social purpose officer, so somebody who's at very senior level in the executive board, whose job it is to hold us accountable, to conduct research, to lead what's called the social purpose lab, to look at what we do, how we do it, and the impact we're having. And we've got an entire institution made up of activists and creatives, people who care passionately about this, people who are here to get an education in designing and designing for the future. So it's a huge asset. On the other hand, though, we are geographically dispersed. As I say, libraries, 8 different libraries dotted around London. We're a really big organisation full of bureaucratic processes that you get that comes with this kind of setup. We're collegiate, so we have different institutions within our umbrella organisation, and so it's complex. And fundamentally, all these activists and creatives are makers and generators of things and stuff. So there is a lot of output, physical output, that we are generating. And I think that does mean that we have quite a lot of conflict when we look at how we drive change, because the reality for us is, for example, being an arts institution with everyone very passionate about doing the right thing, but we also have a real emphasis on physical objects and the book as a physical object. Print versus e is not a simple transaction for us. It's a really complex thing where our students have traditionally been accepted that art students use libraries slightly differently. They are browsers, they're looking for inspiration, they prefer the physical book. So we don't have any easy answers there. And we do have a dichotomy, I would say, between those middle ones, the chief social purpose officer, a real commitment at the top, but the lived experience of people within the organisation suffering from those bureaucratic processes, which sometimes I think leads to accusations of greenwashing or a difficulty, a scepticism, a cynicism about what we say we want to do and whether we're actually going to do it. And then that final one, I think we have genuine attempts to move forward that clash with other imperatives of what we do as an arts and education institution. So we are creators who want to create in a sustainable way, but we are still making a lot of stuff. So we still have that. So we decided in libraries that we need to look at those pros and cons, and the staff engagement is our biggest asset. And so we aimed to use that really. If I could have the next slide. Oh, that's not the one I was expecting. Could I go forward 2 slides? And that's the one. So what we did first of all is we ran workshops. We made use of the experts in our institution who know about this stuff. We brought them in to run workshops for our teams. And out of that, we aimed to empower people to think about what they could do and get them to think about what we need to escalate within the institution. We've got these people at the top with this commitment, so we want to make use of that. So we ended up with local action plans, with sustainability champions in all of our teams. They came together to form a community of practice, and actually that community of practice has grown, and during the pandemic we ended up moving online and building a team where the whole department is now part of that. And we use that for resource sharing. It's got a free cycle site. We've even got seed swap going on. It's something where we maintain the enthusiasm and the interest of our staff, as well as trying to achieve practical things, helping to share good experience and good practice between teams, new ideas and that kind of thing. The department's got a strand of staff development. Every year we have a staff development programme which is rolled out, and that strand is in there, so we're constantly looking to actively provide support for staff in this area. And we join that action up across the organisation, so we're trying to bring in these experts and these pockets of work across our massive bureaucratic institution. Creating those links, particularly with the Climate Emergency Network and key staff in the institution, is really important for us. And we've had some projects we've been part of and some funding bids that were successful that have helped us to kind of achieve some of those things on our action plans, which Karen's going to talk to you about in a moment. That's really important. We did develop our own sustainability principles, but we've kind of left those now. We're moving over more towards an adoption of the Green Libraries Manifesto. Now, if I could go back a slide, just to confuse everything. The project that we've been successfully working on, Library Services is piloting a research project within the university for climate systems mapping. And the aim of this project really is to conduct a piece of research to gather up what is happening across the board. And the purpose of this really is that it highlights where we've got activity in the university and how we can be really savvy, I guess, about choosing what we're going to prioritise out of all these different things that we can do, to scale them up so that they can have maximum impact, and actually to join them up so we can measure that impact. There's a whole list of things on here, the kinds of things that have happened that came out of those action plans in libraries, the kind of things we do. Some are bigger than others. Embedding sustainability in the curriculum is key, and that's quite a big piece of work to do, but terrace gardens, seed swaps and so on. But that top one is really a good example of what this research project is aiming to do. We had our library staff in our teams all thinking about how they could order stationery. What stationery? Do we ditch the plastic BIC pens? What would be the best things to order? Within our community practice, of course, they can join up and they can share their experience and build up a list of what Library Services thinks, you know, all the libraries need stationery, they need the same kind of things, what do we need? How much more impact could we have if the university as a whole, if the procurement took that on, if the suppliers lists are actually definitely giving us only suppliers that we know are sustainable, if they are providing lists within that of recommended purchases. Everybody needs pens in the university. Are we all buying big plastic pens? Are we buying the right things? Doing those things at scale and measuring the impact through procurement, who would be able to see all of those orders in a way that individual departments like cannot, is the way really to if we map those systems, we can have more impact. So that's an example of that. I can now go forward 2 slides, I think. This is just an example from our website of how we publicise what we do. Really key to this is telling the story of what's happening. There's a lot to understand. It's a really complex picture. So we use case studies, and there's a couple of Library Services case studies on the website at the moment. One of these key ones for us is talking about collections and collecting conscientiously. We have a manifesto that we're developing that works with not just Library Services, but museums in the university, archives, and thinks about the whole picture of collecting responsibly and what that looks like with climate emergency in mind. So supply chains, history, our responsibility, our social purpose is all wrapped up in that idea of collecting what we buy, what we keep, what we curate. And so that's a really important one for us. Next slide, please. And what we do next is getting to the really tricky stuff, I think, and I'm going to hand over to Karen in a minute to talk about that, but just give you a flavour, if you could go to the next slide. The thing that I think we do next, which is the really hard bit, is the challenging assumptions. What I call, we've got a number of big immovable objects. The things that, you know, we've ticked off the list, we can fiddle around with stationery what we like, but how are we going to tackle the really big stuff? And one of the key things there is understanding how narrative can grow up, particularly within our profession as librarians. There are things that we have always done. There is practice to be challenged. And I think that's the key. We have to question and we have to challenge, and we have to maybe rebuild our narratives a little bit. So an example for us is books and supply chain and plastic covers. And when we came to looking at covering everything in plastic at UAL, what we had was a really strong narrative that we have to do this because our books will literally fall apart without it, and it would be less sustainable for us to buy more books because they're falling apart than it would to protect them and keep them forever. All good points. We know, as Simon said, that there are trade-offs, and actually there's no black and white, right and wrong in this. There's often things that look more sustainable that actually turn out not to be. But the point was nobody was questioning this, and no one was offering any evidence for it. Nobody had done any work. So that narrative was growing unchallenged, and we decided to challenge it. And of course, what you need to do that is you need to look at accountability, and you need to look at data and evidence. So what we did there is a research project to look at whether our books really were falling apart, whether our usage is the same. We don't buy an awful lot of cheap flimsy paperbacks. We don't have the same usage as a public library with that many high rates of turnovers and issues. We don't have that in most of our stock. So we actually did a little bit of research looking at the usage of our stock, how many times things go out on average, what's the high use item, what are the lower use items. And we looked at a more nuanced picture. Instead of covering everything in plastic, does some of it need protecting more than other bits? And so that data and evidence was really important. And likewise, going back to look at the impact of decisions and changes we make will be really important. And in terms of that, it's helped us to stop doing certain things and do things differently. And sometimes this is quite a hard choice. So for us, we wanted to stop covering everything in plastic. And so we have stopped covering everything in plastic. But there were things where we said, well, we just can't stop doing that. We need to prioritize. We have other drivers here than sustainability. We need to make a decision about what's more important. So we've looked at doing things differently, and we're using biofilm, for example, on some of our stock. So I think that challenging of assumptions, building a new narrative and basing that narrative on actual data and evidence and the impact you're having by doing so is really crucial to this whole area of work. And I think that's how we're going to move forward. I'm going to hand over to Karen to talk practically about some of the other projects we've been running to do exactly that.
Okay, next slide, please. Good. This is the best slide because it's got some actual recycling on it. So I think it's the best slide. I just wanted to briefly talk through, it's the only slide, in fact, that I have, some practical examples of what we've been doing. And I think the first practical thing that people who are interested in this area can do is disseminate it. The BIC supply work, the supply chain work that you've already heard about, I think it's really important for us all to remember that publishers and other actors in this supply chain are working really hard to do better in relation to sort of physical and digital content. We've not talked much about digital, but that's the case as well. They have dedicated roles in their teams, and they're not necessarily the enemy or the evil empire in any way. So awareness really around that kind of supply chain work that is going on. I don't think Karina mentioned the Green BIC Alliance, which is just a place where the UK, the US and Canada are working together on initiatives like checklists for publishers and printers with regard to sustainability, looking at their carbon footprint, and all this stuff is open and out there for you to be able to see their accreditations and stuff around that kind of work. It's all out there, and I think it's quite important to promote it within the profession where that's possible. The second point is both collective and local procurement activity. Sustainability, if it wasn't before, has now become part of ethical purchasing. So it's increasingly important as a part of purchasing. And with consortia purchasing, amongst other things, that includes prioritising fair and ethical trade through the supply chain, minimising and quantifying actually environmental impacts. So that would be policies and accreditations and practices designed to reduce carbon impacts within supplier organisations and their supply chain, their scope 2 and 3 emissions as well, and how they can help customers to achieve their carbon zero goals. There's also social value, particularly at the consortia level, where local community and customer value is being looked at alongside EDI. And often this whole package of ethical purchasing is sitting now at sort of 10% of scoring on big tenders. And these big tenders encompass all university purchasing, for example, of print books across the UK. So it's a lot of purchasing that these encompass. Taken very seriously, so that's another thing I think to promote. And then there's local procurement. Both Simon and Rowan mentioned the continual trade-offs that you have to make between things like an ethical approach and efficiency. For us, also supplier diversity, but also meeting institutional financial requirements. But it's important to note, I think, that people are doing their best. With regard to collections, we still buy a lot of books at UAL, more books than most people. As Rowan's described, we stopped routinely covering library books with plastic. And there is context to that. It wouldn't suit everybody, but it is something that we've been able to convince staff won't be a thing of disaster, using evidence and analysis and stress testing of alternative covers, that kind of thing. So we stopped covering ourselves, and we stopped our shelf-ready suppliers covering as a routine thing. When we do need to cover, or when we do need to ask them to cover, we're using bio-based book foils. These are made about 75% sugarcane and a water-based adhesive. It's not perfect. These plastics aren't the answer to everything. They still have to be recycled chemically or mechanically, depending on what they are, as plastic, but they bind carbon dioxide as that raw material grows in such a way as it's pretty much CO2 neutral. There's quite a lot online about this. I'd be really happy to send people links if they're interested. And then we continue with a measure of processing to identify our books as ours and provide security for them using RFID tags, etc., etc. We've also invested in a direct thermal label printer, which doesn't use ink for in-house processing, which is a small thing, but we think it's improved.
Sorry
and
to
then,
interrupt, just your very gentle 2-minute warning.
Very nearly there, very nearly there.
Okay,
the other two things to mention are delivery services. This is quite a big ask at UAL. We have 8 libraries across multiple sites. Students can borrow, return, reserve books for delivery or collection from any of our libraries, and we're shifting between 60 and 70,000 books a year between our sites. The university doesn't fund this separately. We fund this out of our own budgets. And we've moved to electric vans, certainly for the main part of this run. We've moved to electric vans, which has had a significant impact, we hope, on our carbon handprint, carbon footprint. But it's not necessarily a straightforward thing. Electric vans come with issues. The sheer availability of electric vans is a struggle for our provider, and charging them is also a struggle. So there's that service versus environment piece as well. And then finally, I just wanted a quick word about disposal, book disposal. We've moved our print book disposal to a supplier who can quantify exactly what they're responsibly recycling, as well as just giving you a bit of money back for what they sell. And that's been really good, because we've been able to say to the university, I can't remember how much it was, Rowan might remember, a significant amount was recycled responsibly by an accredited supplier over the past 12 months. And then we had the problem of audiovisual stuff, for example, CDs, DVDs, VHS tapes in particular. VHS is full of nasties. It's very difficult to recycle. And sometimes you have to pay for responsible recycling. So we found somebody who can do this for us on a periodic basis and managed to cost neutralize it with book sales income from moving to our new book disposal company. But with DVDs, AV and VHS in particular, these are broken down into sort of granulates that can be sold and used again in the manufacture of plastic. So it's good. And with VHS, which almost, we think 90% of old VHS tapes have ended up in landfill over a long time. These can actually be shredded expensively, and then go to another plant who sort this shredded material on conveyors and by machines, partly by hand, using magnets, etc., to separate out the plastic from the tape. So all in all, that's the nitty-gritty, really, of what we've been doing. I don't know, Rowan, if you have one more slide to go to about the future, or whether you want to wrap it up there.
Yeah, just that you can read more about the Climate Action Plan and social purpose. There is a story on there with the numbers that Karen's just mentioned. I think it was the electric vehicles have saved nearly 10 tonnes of carbon a year. Yeah, and the 2,000 boxes of books went for resale and reuse recycling last year. Yeah, that's it, I think.
Thank you. We can't hear you, Karina.
No, I'm going to have to stop you there. Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, but inspirational, absolutely fantastic, the work that's going on at UAL. Again, what's coming through is the importance of staff, and I thought it was really interesting the point about having to challenge assumptions and rebuild narratives. I think that's really, really crucial. Just because we've always done it doesn't mean we should always keep doing it. So I think that that's a really valuable piece of advice there. And again, Karen, to your point, the issues of change, looking at service versus the environment, how can you sort of marry the two without losing, without being sort of detrimental to either, you know, and is that even possible? So very, very interesting. And I'm sure everybody on this session will be going to your website to have a look for more information. So thank you very much, both of you. This now brings us to our Q&A session. So we are a little bit over time, so we don't have very long. So I'm just going to have a look and see if we have any. If I could ask our speakers to put their cameras back on, please, that would be very helpful. I'll stop sharing. So let me just see if we've got any. So I'll have they all been very shy. I think they've all been very shy. There aren't any questions, so just a final call for questions to our audience. Please make the most of the speakers. They're here for the next 5 minutes, so I'll ask a couple while we're waiting, so don't be shy. It's a general question, really. We've talked a lot about change and the passion that's there within our teams of people, our colleagues, etc., and more broadly. I'm just interested to know, excuse me, the challenge of change. Now, change, some people love it, some people aren't frightened of it, others are a little bit reluctant, a bit nervous of it, and then of course you have everybody sort of in between those two. What would you say the biggest challenge of change is within your experience? I mean, that's assuming that the changes will happen. So I have sort of leapt ahead and made the assumption that certain changes will be happening. Have you found most people receptive? Have you found it difficult? Has it been, you know, what's the journey been like? Rowan?
I think what I've noticed is there's a real dissonance. It's really values-based, this thing. That passion comes from it being an individual value. And I think there's a dissonance sometimes between that challenging with another value. So almost like in the service terms, it's things conflicting priorities. I think for our staff and for our colleagues, I think the same is true, the individual value. An example is in HE, we've talked non-stop for years about the student experience. It's paramount, it's everything, it's absolutely critical. And it is, and that is associated with a value that most of the people I work with hold dear, this idea that people first and having a good experience is crucial. And it's it's all wrapped up in their professional identities. That is who they are. It's not just a thing they do. Them delivering that experience is what they're about. Yeah. So when you ask them to change things, that might have an impact directly on the student experience. When they're asked to think about doing things differently and they have a concern that it's going to impact on service delivery, you're actually asking them to think about doing something that impacts on something much more personal and related to their identity. And I think that it's that you have to address to get change in this particular area, because I think that dissonance is really clear. People who are so passionate and yet will not do a thing differently. That's what you're seeing there, is that real struggle within yourself, and it's a personal struggle that you have to. There's no good talking just data and just the practicalities. You have to appeal to that.
Yeah, Karen, you wanted to say something.
I'd be interested to see if Yvonne thinks that's.
Oh, can you? We can't hear you very well. Can you? Your microphone.
Yeah, sorry. I'd be really interested to see if Yvonne thinks that's exactly the same for public library colleagues, because all the ones I've met have been very passionate but felt a bit helpless.
Oh, you're on mute. Oh, there you go.
I say yes and no. I think with public, there are a number of challenges, and yes, I can identify what you've said in the public library sector. Yeah, it's really is that feeling of helplessness now is a big thing for public libraries, and just also the time as well. They're so stretched that they really are, and it's just easier to go with the status quo than to stop and introduce something different, and that is a challenge. But the passion is certainly there within the public library sector we've been working with over the last 18 months. But I'm so excited now to be working with other sectors, and brilliant presentations, but I'm really interesting to hear about what's happening at the University of the Arts.
Yes, I should also mention that Karen is the chair of BIC's Libraries Committee as well. So she brings that passion and enthusiasm into that role as well. So and I think you sit on the Green Supply Chain Committee as well, don't you, Karen?
I do. I'm a committee person.
Yeah.
Reliable that way. Is it the same for Harry in Finland? I'm assuming, because it feels to me as if you're further ahead than us, particularly with regard to measuring impact.
Yes, I would say that librarians in general are very committed, but they also think that, okay, libraries already are green. And that, of course, means that we don't need to do anything extra if we already are. But here I must say that I'm looking at the younger generation of librarians, and the attitude is quite different there. They want to come to work in libraries because of sustainability and certain values, and they also have much more active mentality than we used to have. Traditionally, librarians are quite careful, and we want to be neutral and open-minded and so on. So the young librarians I know are much more active and determined that we have to do something. And
yeah, so likely to be active.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I think Simon wanted to say something.
Yeah, all I was going to say about change, or it was a behavioural change, is something I learned yesterday that anybody could pick up in any organisation. And it was a printer saying that they traffic lighted every piece of electronic equipment in their plant. So green was you had to turn it off at night. Yellow or amber was you had to ask, could you turn it off or not? And red was don't even think about it, it stays on. They couldn't believe, but it saved them something like £40,000 to £50,000 a quarter on their electricity bill. So imagine what it would do for anybody doing this. It might not, it's not going to be that kind of level or whatever, but it's a behavioural change that can make a huge impact to what you were doing. And we hear about, you know, your washing machine and your dishwasher are vampire appliances, and they suck electricity unless you actually turn them off at the socket.
True. So it's making it easy, isn't it? It's making it, as well as getting the buy-in and the action, it's making those actions as easy as they can possibly be. I guess it's like, what pain can we take away from the actions just to make them almost BAU in a way? Yeah.
Building the scale, it's all those little independent things that people do and turning it into a powerful collective action.
Definitely. And I think it was just looking at my notes, I think it was you, Karen, you were talking about having only operating with sustainable suppliers. You know, how can we get to a stage where, you know, the suppliers,
well, not necessarily, because that might conflict with something else about that supplier that is important to you. So for example, a very small business, a very small publisher who wouldn't have access to all the things that the bigger boys have, you might choose to purchase from them. So that might conflict with your sustainable approach to purchasing.
Yeah.
So I think you do have to keep an open mind. It's not one thing or the other. It's lots of things. It's a basket of things.
Yeah.
And I think it's about everybody doing their best.
Yeah. Okay. We are out of time. So on that very positive note of everybody doing their best, I think I'm going to call an end to the session. We haven't had any questions from the audience, so they've all been very shy. But you know, that's not a problem. So I'm just going to wrap up then very quickly, and because we are out of time, it'll be a quick wrap up. So we've heard from IFLA and Helsinki Library about looking at buildings, looking at the, is your building a green building? What influence can you have on that, if any? Difficulties of obtaining a digital footprint, difficulties of calculating the carbon footprint, the challenges that come with that, the impact of climate change and the eco crisis on libraries, more of a bigger question around that, which we didn't really have time to go into. Lots of other things as well, green library services, emphasis on social sustainability as well, and the role of the librarians, how librarians are the perfect people. They're so well positioned to promote that sustainable content about sustainability and the literature around that topic. We had from CILIP about their Green Libraries partnership and campaign, and also the Green Libraries Manifesto and Green Libraries Network. So some absolutely excellent work going on there. I encourage everyone to go and look at their website. And again, the role of the librarian, so the unique position of trust of libraries and the librarian, and the goal that every library should become, or it would be wonderful if every library could become a green library. Then we heard from Simon about BIC's projects, which we won't go into because we've already talked about those quite a bit. If anyone wants any more information on those, they are all on our website under our, I think it's live projects tab. I can't find the words. And then we heard from UAL, heard about being a social purpose university, the goal for net zero by 2030 for primary and secondary emissions. We talked about we heard about how your staff are massively engaged and they care passionately, challenges of being geographically dispersed, and some specific examples. So Karen, you talked about your electric vans, plastic covers, and finding that balance between service and the environment and sustainability. And again, the importance of staff keeps coming through. Importantly as well, I think, was embedding sustainability in the curriculum for the students, and also you touched on sort of embedding that type of behaviour and goals with the staff as well. But most importantly for me, that really sort of shone out from that was the advice to challenge assumptions and rebuild narratives. I think that's really key. Yeah, and then I think we touched briefly on ethical purchasing as well. So thank you all so much for your time today. I'm just going to share some final slides to make up for the slides that I didn't share earlier on. So thank you all for attending. The link to the Green Hub is there. You can stay in touch with us. If you want to join our mailing list, please do. I'd just like to say thank you, massive thank you to our speakers today. So on behalf of everyone in attendance, I'd like to say thank you to Harry, Yvonne, Simon, Rowan and Karen for taking time out to prepare for and present for today. So, it's just the work that goes on behind the scenes, what you don't see here today. So there's time invested there as well. We'll make the presentation slides available shortly, and the recording will be on our YouTube channel soon as well. And we'll send you the links to the YouTube channel because I don't think we've put them in any of the slides. So when we email you after the event, we'll share that with you. To all our attendees, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us today. Please do stay in touch. I'm sorry we ran over, but I can see that some of you are still there. So thank you for staying with us. You can find out more about what we do via the website. The link's there on the screen. And like I've said, join up for our mailing list and you can get updates. You can opt in and out of certain things that you do and don't want to hear from us about. So it just remains for me to say, I hope to see you all at a future BIC event. Until then, take care. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay.